Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and a very warm welcome to this debate on big data, big future. My name is Jacki Davis. I will be moderating this debate. Could I start with a small apology? As you may hear, I am slightly on the husky side this morning, but I will persevere, and I hope it isn't too irritating for all of you. If I descend to a whisper, I still hope because of the mic you'll be able to hear me. We're going to talk today about big data. I want to give you just one number before we start, which tells its own story about what we're talking about here today. More digitized data has been created in the last 2 years than in the rest of human history. That is what we're talking about. It's also been described as the engine of the future European economy, as the fuel for innovation, or the currency is another word that's often used, that will radically transform how we live, how we work, and how we think. And that it will not only be crucial for us as individuals, but also for public administrations and for the way companies operate. So, what are we talking about? What is big data? What challenges does it pose? What opportunities will it bring? What needs to be done to make sure European firms, public administrations, everyone can draw the maximum benefit from it? And what needs to be done to address some of the concerns that go along with it? So, with me to discuss this, I'm delighted to welcome Victor Henning, who is founder and CEO of Mendeley, a global research, collaboration, data and application platform, and Vice President for Strategy at Elsevier, a world-leading provider of science and health information, which acquired Mendeley in 2013. Near to me on this side, Christina, Chief Privacy Officer at IBM, where she is responsible for information policy and practices and leads a global team of legal, data protection and technical professionals addressing privacy and data security issues. And last but not least, Maryline Lengert, who is Senior Advisor in the IT Department of the European Space Agency, where, among other things, she launched an initiative to create a European-owned public cloud called Helix Nebula. She'll tell you a bit more about it. We don't want to have any speeches. We want to dive into the debate. I'm going to ask our panel a few questions, and then I will come out to all of you, as I said earlier, with the microphone and hopefully get your questions and your comments, and we can get a really good discussion going. So, just let's start very simply. I said it has been described as the engine of the European economy, the currency of innovation, the fuel of innovation. Do you agree on the scale of its importance? And what are we talking about when we talk about big data? What is it and how is it being used now before we talk about how much potential it has for the future? Victor, kick us off if you would.
Sure. So, it was actually, for me and my co-founders, the lure of big data, the idea of what big data could achieve, that got us to start the company. So for those of you that are not familiar with Mendeley, the company that I started, the idea was that myself and my co-founders, we were PhD students, and we were struggling with managing scientific papers and scientific information. And our initial idea was, why isn't there software that can automatically extract all the relevant information from those research papers that I already have stored on my hard drive and index them for me, make them searchable, make them filterable, just help me deal with that information. But, the key idea for us that kicked us off on the path of, starting this company, the big data idea was, hold on a sec, if we actually get the software into the hands of hundreds of thousands of millions of scientists around the globe, and they start to extract this information, can't we pool and crowdsource all this information and then do interesting things with it? So, for example, if we have this real-time window into the desktops of millions of scientists working on their bench today, can we not find out what are the global research trends in biology today, in mathematics? What are social scientists working on today? And a whole raft of other ideas like recommendation engines. Based on what I am reading today and other people like me are reading, can I generate recommendations of what I should be reading next, thereby helping me discover scientific literature serendipitously? And that was, in a nutshell, what got us kicked off with this idea to launch Mendeley.
And how long ago was that?
That was in 2008. So today, about 3 million scientists around the globe use Mendeley. They have collectively uploaded more than 500 million scientific papers to Mendeley. So on any given day, any 24 hours, between 5 and 800,000 papers are being added. And we process them in real time, and we generate research statistics, and we generate recommendations and a whole bunch of other things, which I'm sure we can.
And it's free, or you pay for it?
It is free. It is free to use.
It is free. Okay, we'll come back. And how big, I mean, how big do you think the potential of big data, say that's what started you off all that time ago, now 5, 6 years on, do you see its potential as being even greater than you imagined? Or have you revised your opinion at all?
No, absolutely. I think it's even greater because computing power becomes ever more available. When we started Mendeley, we actually thought we'd had to build the entire infrastructure ourselves. We started building, server clusters. And then somewhere along the way, Amazon Web Services became available. We transformed our entire infrastructure around that. And basically what we've done is we've made all the data that we have available to third parties to mine and work with and start their own companies around under Creative Commons license. So today there are more than 300 third-party applications building on Mendeley's data. And they are in turn becoming small companies, small startups from the university spheres to using knowledge transfer to mine that big data. And that's actually creating jobs on a micro level, around the world.
Tempted to ask, has he become a rich man as a result? But we'll leave that one aside. Christina, if I could ask you, IBM clearly thinks it is an engine of the future. Your company has identified it as one of the key 3 areas for growth. How important is it? What already are we talking about, and how big is that potential, do you think?
Well, we feel very strongly that this is going to be the fuel not only for Europe's future, not only for Europe's innovation and growth, but for everybody's. And I'm so delighted to have your story to talk about, because it illustrates what is changing. Victor started out with a problem. He had more information than he could make sense of using, his brain. And what did he do? He made that information more accessible to himself, and then joined together with others to find patterns that would not have been evident to anybody working on his or her own. So we have more data than ever. Where is it coming from? It's coming from all over the place. It's coming from social. It's coming from mobile. It's coming from pervasive instrumentation. There are all kinds of sensors. There's computational power being built into all kinds of things you don't think about as a computer. Probably your most sophisticated device in your personal life may well be your car, which may or may not be evident to you, but it's true. So all of these things are coming together with improved kinds of processing power and storage. Like you turn to the cloud, which is it's an innovation that made it much easier for you to achieve your goals. All of these technological trends are coming together to make what we call big data possible. Now, big data is one of those terms like cloud. It obscures as much as it reveals. I think it might be more helpful to think about a data-driven economy. What does that mean, and what does it do? It's doing all kinds of things. I was looking at this really very charming little notebook that we got, and on the inside, there's a quote from President Barroso, and it says, "Innovation is above all about improving the quality of life." And some of the examples of big data here in Europe that are closest to my heart are about exactly that. We have a major research center in Dublin, one of the only ones of its kind, that's devoted to our Smarter Cities work. And we've done extensive work with Dublin in traffic, in helping to decrease traffic volumes, increase the reliability of predictions about traffic, decrease emissions, decrease time spent on the road by people, improving the quality of life without building roads, without making new investments in infrastructure, without putting new cars on the road, but rather by understanding the data that's already available to us. Other examples, the Dutch Ministry of Water is using sensors and levees and data from radar and other sources to make better predictions about flooding. And since you live in the Netherlands, I think like 70% of the GDP of the Netherlands comes from low-lying areas, so absolutely critical. And the weather this year in Europe suggests this isn't a one-off. Toulouse, the city of Toulouse, is using information from social networks to improve the speed with which it responds to infrastructure problems like traffic, potholes in the roads.
Okay. Okay. No, it's wonderful to have the passion and those very practical examples of exactly what we're talking about. Maryline, I mentioned you've been involved in this cloud project at ESA. Can you tell us a bit more about that? And would you echo what the other two have said about the potential of this big data just keeps growing and growing, really?
Yes, Elix Nebula started in 2011. The idea is that all scientists do more or less the same thing. They acquire data, process data, and distribute data. So we've been working with CERN, we've been working with the MBL on ESA, saying, okay, we all have the same need. The need is to reach our community and to make our community work on our data and eventually make them work on the cross-domain science. Because right now science is very much in silos, and they work with their own data set and make their own research, but they are very rarely cross communities. So we started this initiative based on a partnership based on federation of providers, publicly funded assets and commercial assets and tools and everything to build a science cloud. And this brought a lot of potential. For example, in ESA, the Earth Observation Program has started a pilot on Elix Nebula, which is looking at areas that are prone to earthquake or to volcano eruption. For this, we have all our satellite data, but of course, the satellite data alone do not do much. So if you can add to this data in situ data that are measured by instrument, but also a lot of uncatalogued data, like a picture, like a movie, like did you feel it on when there is an earthquake? People answer. There is a lot of unstructured data and this is the big data concept. It's not just a matter of a quantity of data, but it's the fact that you have to mix up movies, pictures, instrumentation, all kind of things and make sense out of them. And with this, we have been able to realize that, for example, a crack in a house can be seen from a satellite, because the information we get from satellite is how much the ground is moving at sub-centimeter level. So we can see over years how the ground is moving and how it can impact some buildings. So it's by putting the pictures and putting the location with the GPS and putting the satellite data and looking that there have been some drilling, some part of the city that has impacted the ground. So you get a lot of information you would never have got before, because everybody would have looked only at its own set of data. So for science, there is a huge potential if you start to mix up in the framework of climate change, if in the framework of disease, malaria with WHO informations, satellite institutes, you can really make a lot of sense out of it. So big data, yes, for science, it will be an engine for innovation.
Okay, so that's the opportunities. What about the challenges? Because one statistic that I read that really shocked me was that of the top 20 companies that are using big data to address particular problems, to address issues, as you've said, but also to make money, only 2 of them are European. Question: why is that? And is the challenge in terms of creating a data single market or whatever, is the challenge also technological? Do we have, you said, Victor, you started with a problem. Why is there nothing to help me index all this? You've obviously developed some of the tools to do that. Do we have the tools we need to cope with this, to make sense of all this? Because sheer flood of information on its own, a sheer flood of data, is meaningless unless you can collect it, store it, capture it. So what do you see as the big challenges in order to realise all this potential you've all talked about? Victor?
Yeah. Personally, I think that a lot of the innovation that you see, particularly in the United States, on big data analyses, is coming out of startups. Whereas in Europe, it's very difficult to get funding on a large scale for such ideas. My experience starting a company in Europe was that very often venture capitalists in Europe look for revenue very, very early on. Whereas some of these ideas, they require massive upfront investment, technology investment, and a belief in the potential down the line for something to change the world or change certain markets. And I think the venture capitalists in Europe are much more risk averse than the American counterparts, which I think is one reason for that.
So funding for you is absolutely crucial. What about other barriers? Are there any other barriers to the take-up and use of big data for you?
Yeah, well, I mean, quite a few probably. Two specific ones I can think of. The first one is legislative uncertainty. So for companies like Mendeley, which deal with big data, but that data comes from multiple countries, it's provided by users, which frameworks do we fall under? What happens with the data that we store? Where do we store it? What are our rights in relationship to that data? Can we mine it? Can we not mine it? Etc., etc. So that's one thing that's potentially more difficult for European companies compared to, say, America or Japan, where there are more exemptions in the law as well for text mining and data mining. The other big challenge that we faced was also getting talent. So Mendeley was started in London by 3 Germans. So for us, it was very easy to move to London and set up the company there. But we once tried to get a very qualified data scientist from Serbia to work for us in London. He had done a PhD, he had worked at Yahoo, he had actually studied here in Brussels, where he did his PhD, published papers in English, but the UK Home Office insisted that he had to do an English test in order to qualify for us to make him a job offer. He had done an English test, but 5 years ago, the English test had to be at most 2 years old. It had to be a digital one, so we had to find a test center in Serbia. So on and on and on, to the point where it took us 8 months to actually, from interviewing him, to get him into the office in London to get him working on that problem. With a lot of bureaucratic red tape and a lot of talent that we just can't get to.
Interestingly, and it's not homegrown. It doesn't. The career of data scientist is still a relatively new one. You can't necessarily find the people you want. Come back on that. For you, I mentioned that figure, 2 companies out of 20. Why? What for you are the challenges? And perhaps you could address this point, as you are a legal expert as well, of the legislative framework. Whose is it?
Happy to. I've not seen those figures, but we've been in Europe for 100 years. We have tens of thousands of Europeans working for us, comparable to our employee population in the United States. So, question one is who you call a not European. I would very much echo Victor's point about the legislative framework being extremely important. I'm the chief privacy officer, and I worry about people. I worry about data about people and how do you use it responsibly. And having harmonization in Europe would be helpful. Having interoperability among legal schemes throughout the world would be even more helpful. One of the things that we're doing on that policy innovation side is we're working with the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Organizations, new cross-border privacy rules. We were the first company to be certified under them last year. And the notion there is they've stated a set of high-level principles that all the member economies will ultimately recognize in law in some manner. And rather than looking for all the legal systems to line up, the idea is that if an organization can have a verified method of showing that they're living up to those principles, that they'll be able to move data across borders more easily. And we think that's very important. It seems very technical, very obscure, but the ability to use data across borders, to draw upon the best infrastructure, best talents, best tools in the world is going to be critical for everybody. And it's going to be critical for Europe. Europe needs a legislative framework that's more open, that's more embracing of the need to use data, and that brings this need for innovation into play.
So we need a mindset change as much as anything else.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I want to come back on the other barriers, the concerns about security a little bit later on, but very striking what you both say, because at the October summit, EU leaders emphasised the need to create effectively a single market for data. We need the right framework conditions. What, for each of you, and Maryline, perhaps a thought from you first, what are the key elements of an effective data ecosystem, if we can use that word? I mean, she mentioned interoperability of legislative frameworks. I'm also wondering about interoperability of the data itself, whether that works. Is that one of the things we need to address?
Yeah, absolutely, because we are trying to mix up data coming from completely different sources, and if they are not catalog with the metadata that allow them to be retrievable, and that you can, for example, our satellite data, they are very highly controlled, high quality, and they are reference point. But then we have to be able to plug in the other data into this framework so that we're sure that we take the right data at the right place, otherwise it doesn't make sense anymore. So there is a lot of work being done, on still to be done, on working on this interoperability of data. But if I would like to come back to this European aspect that you mentioned earlier, if we started Helix Nebula, it was exactly for this, because when we scientists start to understand the cloud was there, was coming on, is potentially very useful for what we want to do, we turned to a European industry, and we didn't see much going on. And we said, okay, what we want is not what is currently on the market. You know, this centralized cloud, commercial cloud, you have kind of locking, you have to give away all your data, and your data policy is gone on everything. So this is not what we wanted. We wanted a competitive market with European providers that we can swap from one day to the other. And this is how this partnership came to life, with the federation and with the ability to implement your own data policy. So you don't give away your data to the provider, you implement the data policy together with your data set. So people can access, if they are entitled to access, they can access the data. If they are not, they cannot access the data. So this was key for us, because, you know, in science also, although our data are open and free, because this is the policy of ESA, we are very interested in how people are using the data, because satellites see a lot of things, and we would like to be sure that they are not misused. And on the other side, we have EMBL with us, which is working on genomics, and genomics is also information that you want to protect somewhere. So there is a lot of privacy on CERN. It's completely different, because they want to have the scientists working on the data having the access only to them for a certain period of time, this embargo time, before it's made public to the others. So everybody has want to keep some control on the data also.
Okay, we'll come back on that. I'm going to come out to all of you soon, and indeed take any questions on Twitter. But this key elements of a, as I say, sorry for the word, it's overused, data ecosystem. How do we in Europe create a really effective framework to realise all this potential? Victor, Christina, and then I'll come out to all of you.
I think it actually comes down to good old-fashioned marketing as well. So it's not just the legislative framework that needs to be in place, but one thing that you need to do to create a marketplace is to create a market, and you do that by marketing. Say with Mendeley, I think the reason that we managed to build this ecosystem is because we were very focused on outreach from the beginning. Yeah. We focused on building an active community of people using our tools. We made them aware that they could get their data out through our API. We had developer contests to get people working with our API and build applications around it. We partnered with Amazon and Thomson Reuters and others to bring publicity to the availability of that data. And again, I think if I compare American startups, American companies with European ones, I think us Europeans, and particularly us Germans, I'm German by the way, we think that good products speak for themselves, and if it's out there, then if it's good, then people will find it. But that's not really the truth. You have to get people aware of your product and of your tools and of your data availability, of your APIs, and you have to actively market them to get people to use them. And if you don't do that, I don't think that the marketplace will arise out of nowhere.
Christina.
You're quite right to emphasize the importance of a data ecosystem, but I'd like to suggest to you that the European data ecosystem needs to be not focused inward, but looking outward as well. If the best products and services that are going to be a part of your solution, a part of how you're going to change the world and move the state of the art forward, if a part of that you're finding outside Europe, so be it. If you concentrate on catching up on all the building blocks within Europe, you're never going to be able to be at the cutting edge. That is to say, if you insist on sourcing everything within Europe, then you're going to be putting yourself at a disadvantage to the rest of the world. So part of the openness, part of the European ecosystem has to be an openness to what's available everywhere.
Any other key elements? You talked about the legislative framework. That clearly very important in order to be able to, and these issues that relate to the interoperability in a broader sense.
Well, I think that we'll be talking about it a bit later in more detail, but an ongoing commitment to research and development is going to be absolutely key. Things do not stay the same in this field. It's changing literally day to day. So, you know, especially in economic times that are, you know, challenging for long periods of time, it may seem like a difficult thing to do, but both on the European level and on the member state level, you know, a commitment to research, a commitment to research and development funding is going to continue to be critical.
Okay, I want to come back on some of the concerns and how we address those, and start with you on that, Christina, because that's what you do every day. But let's first see if anyone wants to come in. Could you please introduce yourself and please be brief? Thank you, sir.
My name is Manfred Lüth. I'm involved in data visualization. My question is for Christina. Maybe you can have a couple of words on digital autonomy, meaning about the privacy of your own data when it comes from a user point of view. How much you should own your own data you give away normally all the time by agreeing to the conditions of trade when applying to use Mendeley or other services. Thank you.
Okay, so for you the key is controlling it yourself. We'll come back on that in a minute. Any others? Hang on a second, sir. Please, thank you very much. If I could just reach across you. Apologies.
Kim Smatter from the market research industry. My question actually is linked to kind of what you were talking about, the regulatory framework. How do we deal with the fact that we have some regulators saying, actually, we shouldn't be collecting more data, we should be collecting less, so data minimization, versus kind of the whole kind of promise of big data is actually the more information we have, the more we can actually do things with it, and the more we can create new insights.
The argument for creating less being?
So we have regulators saying actually we should be collecting a lot less because that creates less data protection risks and all the other things.
Right. So yes, the key question there, how do we collect it? How do we make sure it isn't a straitjacket to innovation, but we use it in the right way? Please, sir. Thank you.
My name is Eric. I'm in a big data consulting company. We'd like to know, apart from the big data, what are the trends in the algorithms to mine the big data?
Okay. I don't know how scientific you are and whether you can talk algorithms or not, but any others? Okay, one more and then we'll come back. Please, sir.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Professor Linson from the MNRC Newport Network. For those ladies and gentlemen who don't already know, the MNRC is a neuroscience research center interested in the education of tomorrow, and Newport Network is interested in the governance of tomorrow. Now, the new capacity building program integrates both education of tomorrow with governance of tomorrow, and there are already 130 countries participating. I'm wondering whether big data is a typical integrated interdisciplinary challenge that requires integrated interdisciplinary education of tomorrow, that paves the way to integrated interdisciplinary governance, or new global governance, or governance of tomorrow.
Okay, thank you very much. Let's come back, and if we could pick up, and Christina, I'll start with you on these questions related to privacy. I mean, clearly, the major concern is the approach, is the most effective approach, that control over our own data. Is it, and do we have the technology, do we have the tools to control it effectively? What's the work being done in this area? To what degree is this a legislative problem, and to what degree is this a technical issue?
Okay, so when we're talking about the regulatory challenge around big data as it applies to data about people, the challenge is to create conditions that are conducive to both trust in the digital economy, trust that our personal information is being used in ways that are appropriate, lawful, and respectful, fundamentally, of individuals, but also to help organizations and people derive the value from big data. There's a lot of debate going on right now. I mean, these questions are so big that I'm struggling just a little bit with how to, how and where to begin. You asked about data minimization. That's not just something that some regulators are talking about. It's one of the fair information practice principles that have been around since the 1970s when the OECD started formulating and articulating what a fair information practices mean. And those practices evolved in a day when it was pretty straightforward how data was collected and pretty clear about how it was being used. You went to a bank, you filled out a form, you knew they were going to use it to see whether you were going to get a mortgage and at what rate, and all that was pretty clear. Now that data is being generated in all kinds of ways, and it is not necessarily transparent to you how that data is being generated. It's not being only collected in this one-to-one area. And when you are out there generating data yourself, whether it's through your activity on the web or through your social networking or through you're carrying around this amazing little device called your smartphone that's generating data all the time, these are real challenges that we're facing. And I'm not here to tell you that we know all the answers right now. We don't. These are emerging. Now, what we do at IBM, we're a large company. We've got businesses we're doing business in about 170 countries around the world. We've got 400,000 employees. We use what we in the field call an accountability approach. All right. So we have a global privacy assessment that we use to help process owners within our business record, document, and understand what they're doing and to help us identify mitigation techniques for them. Now, for sort of usual kinds of data uses, that's all pretty automated. And when they get complex, as in many of these analytics approaches, then my team gets involved in councils. Now, you pointed out that data minimization is in some tension with big data, where more data may create better outcomes, substantively, more accurate outcomes. And that's true. And that's one of the reasons why these principles are under some pressure and why there's so much debate going on around it. There's going to be a lot of innovation in this field as well. Sometimes you see this kind of false dichotomy between privacy and innovation. I'm here to suggest to you that privacy both creates and requires innovation. There's a big privacy by design movement as well. I'm going on again.
No. Victor, and it's this question there that actually we should be collecting less data. That's the way you protect people's privacy. If you don't have it in the first place, you can't infringe their privacy.
I think the first two questions are impossible to answer without referencing the enormous scandal that's evolved in the last year. I mean, what the NSA and the GCHQ have done is completely undermine all of the best practices that we previously thought were enough to secure the data. I mean, even if you, as a startup company, or as an established company, if you follow best practices, but the GCHQ can tap the internet backbone, the NSA can intercept a server that's being shipped to you and install malware, and if data can be forced to be handed over through private courts, what use is all of the best practice that you've put into place to protect that data? And it makes me furious. I mean, it wouldn't stop me from starting another company in that space, but it would certainly make me more wary of government intrusion. And I think government intrusion is the biggest risk to big data and to people having trust in big data solutions and the potential of this to do positive things. So I think
the concern is not the traditional one about companies misusing our data. It is governments that you really worry about.
I feel very strongly about that.
Okay, quick one and then Maryline.
So I think it's important, though, to distinguish between those issues. I think sometimes we throw all of these issues together in a pot and we fail to untangle them. So issues around government access to information that have been really put in the forefront by the set of issues that we're talking about, those need to be addressed not only by the United States government, but by many governments around the world. And they oughtn't be either a reason for companies like my own to say, well, you know, nothing we can do, or to say, well, therefore, we've got to shut down organizational use of data. The issues are distinct. They need to be kept distinct, and they have to be both addressed in a proactive and responsible way.
Maryline, a word on this, if you would, and also could you pick up on that other question about this being an interdisciplinary issue?
Yes, and maybe I could come back on two aspects. The first one is that in our initiative we have a public-private partnership, which means that there is some public entity but also some private companies that wants to make money. So coming back to how we ensure the marketplace is working, putting big companies that want to make money really helps, because they are the ones that are going to push the usage of the platform, drive some SMEs to come here, because if the SMEs come, they will use the computing. And in our case, they would be even ready to store our data for free, because they know that the more data they will have on the platform, the more people will come and use the CPU to run on the data. So at the end, it's a win-win. And this is how we can make, they end up to make money out of it, which at the start they say, well, you scientists, you are the worst customer we can even think of, because you are not the one that are going to pay. So at the end, we find a good business model. And coming also, there were discussion on the governance. In our case, governance it's science-driven. So what we call the user side, which are the scientists, have a very strong word in the governance. We, of course, want the guys to make money, because it has to make money if we want it to be sustainable, but we don't want that it turn up to be just make money very fast. I mean, we know that there is some investment that have to be taken, that have to be made, and that it will not return money the next morning. And we want these guys to do it because it's needed if we want to succeed. So we have managed to get this governance in place that is very much scientist-driven, innovation-driven, and bringing a lot of data. I mean, the thing is that you discover things you never thought about. The more data, the more diverse the data, you start to mix up scientific domain you would never have thought you would mix first. And you say, well, but look at this kind of information. It's crazy, because if I put it with this scientific domain, it opens something new. And I'm absolutely sure that there will be new scientific domains that are going to pop out of this, because people are going to cross data set that they would never have done before, and that will bring some new questions.
While you've got the microphone, Maryline, if I could ask you, you talked earlier about your data being open and free, and I just wanted to bring in this other element to the discussion of what the EU has done in terms of the new rules on open access to public sector information, the pilot project on making available the results of research that has been funded by the public purse. How much difference, both in terms of all that data collected by, paid for by governments at all levels, local, regional and so on, and also on the other side, saying if we publicly pay for the research, it should be made available free or at marginal cost. How important do you think is that for the future? And does that cut across when you're in a PPP? Company confidentiality, worrying about commercial interests. How do you square that circle?
Well, I mean, this is very important for us. We've seen that some of these FP7 projects that has been working on scientific data, and that end up to make some algorithm that are really, really interesting. For example, for landslides. And that are dying because the FP7 project is finished, so there is no money anymore. But if we are able, and we are doing it, bring it back on the platform, and using the fact that it's a marketplace, that it has a commercial interest. And of course, oil companies are extremely interested to look at this information of landslide, because when they have big pipelines in Siberia, and they are not going to send people over there all the time, and if they can get this information before it happened, or shortly before it happened, they can intervene at the right place at the right moment. So this information that would be lost otherwise if it would not be made public, on essentially if it would not have a place where it can go and bring the tools and the data together on the same platform so that people can continue to use it and bring some downstream industry is going to make money out of it. So it's going to make the loop and the money come back. And this is a principle of the marketplace.
Victor, your reaction to what the EU is doing in this area, and is enough being done by, you said you're German, you're based in Amsterdam, are national governments addressing this as much as they could? How important will this be, this open access, and where do you see the potential problems?
In my mind, there are two separate issues. One is the legal side, one is the technical side. And I think when we talk about open access, from the legal side, that has the potential to remove a lot of restrictions. But there, again, we have to differentiate between what's called gold open access, where you pay the publisher upfront, and then usually the content is released under a free license, Creative Commons license, etc. Versus green open access, which is the current publishing model, which is paid for by the library when they subscribe to a journal, but the content then becomes freely available on the web after an embargo period of several months. So the green versus gold debate that's currently going on. And the thing is that there's no, let's say, unanimous, I would say there's no consensus between scientists and universities what they want to support, because switching to gold right now requires funds to pay upfront, and not everyone can afford that. With data, if we were to put data under open access mandates and said, well, all data that you generate has to be open access as well, the cost of storing data is much higher even than, storing a publication. So I think there is a challenge here that maybe governments can address about, if we mandate open access, we have to give scientists the means to actually make the data freely available.
Right.
But that's the legal side, which has its intricacies. I think almost a bigger challenge in my mind is the technical side. So even if you have all that content freely available on the web, if I'm a scientist, what do I do with it? Like, I rarely have the resource or technical ability to, set up a web crawler, crawl and ingest all that content, extract the information from the PDF, try and clean and normalize it, spin up an EC2 cluster on Amazon Web Services and try and process it all. And I think that's where, public-private partnerships can come in, or startup companies like Mendeley, or established publishers like Elsevier, who can offer commercial solutions to this. And I think we should be open to these approaches as well, because they do take the complexity out of using these tools for individual researchers, which brings me back to the original point about marketing, that you have to make things usable and easily accessible for end users, or end users being researchers in this case.
Christina, how does the European approach to this issue compare with that in the US and in other parts of the world? Are we leading on this? Are we on the back foot? And how important do you think it is?
Well, I think it's clearly important. I think that Europe's taking a rather centralized approach to it, in contrast to other parts of the world where it's happening at a more federated level. When data becomes available to lots of different people, they find new and interesting ways to use it. So, fundamentally, having data be open, having data be a fuel for as many people as possible is a good thing. And a lot of the data we're talking about isn't about people. It's data that's gathered by sensors. It measures physical things, and that has fewer issues associated with it than data about people. But data about people is some of the most interesting and valuable data that we're generating today. And so how can we make that open? Well, some of that's going to depend on innovation and anonymization techniques. Some of it's going to depend on innovation and statistical techniques that let us use it in an aggregated way. And some of it's going to depend on the legislative approach that makes it clear what we can use, what we have to do to use it, and I'm speaking specifically about anonymization right now.
Okay, I don't know, I realised I didn't ask anyone the algorithms question. Not being a scientist, I'm not sure I understood it. Can anyone help us with that question? came from the audience. Victor, I'm staring at you, hoping you can help.
I'm not a computer scientist myself. My background is in social science. But, I mean, maybe to answer your question, all I can testify to is the importance of having good data scientists. So when we started doing recommendations based on the literature that we had in our database, basically the key idea, same as with Amazon, people who have read these academic papers have also read those. It's called collaborative filtering. You build a gigantic matrix of all the papers that you have. You look at who reads what, and you look what the overlap is, and then you build recommendations on top of that. So when we started doing that calculation took us, I think, 26 hours. Because, as I said, we had, at that point, about 300 million documents in our database. Now it's 500 million. And every day, we're adding 500,000 to 800,000. So that matrix is constantly being updated. And you constantly have to rerun that calculation so you can refreshen the recommendations. And our data scientists managed to bring that process down from 26 hours to about 15 minutes at about 100th of the cost just by optimizing the algorithms. They have published multiple papers, which you can find on Mendeley, so you can have a look at them, but I can't talk about what exactly they did.
Okay.
Can I pick up on that education point? There was an education question.
Yes, there was
back
about
there.
the interdisciplinary approach. Yeah.
And that is, that education issue is one of the factors that we think is going to be most important for determining whether this big data revolution, this data-driven economy, is going to succeed as much as it can. And we're working today with educational institutions to help, bridge the gap. What schools are teaching does not necessarily map with what organizations need to take advantage of these advances. So we're working with Rensselaer Polytechnic University in New York, Institute in New York, they've established with our help a program, it's a Masters of Science for Business Analytics. We're also working with the schools in New York on what we call PTech, which is it's an educational pathway for secondary school students to become more immersed in the kind of science that businesses are looking for to help them be employable.
Linking back to the point Victor made right at the start about the talent, we need to do some home growing here, and these are the sort of initiatives. Would you agree that this is one of the big challenges for the future, having the right people to realise all these opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, as I said, that there is a potential of needing some, not only data scientists, but scientists altogether to be able to interpret the data, not on the IT part, but on the meaning of the data themselves. So bridging medicine with physics, with chemistry, and with when you look climate change, you need so many talents at the same time to discuss the subject.
But Victor, you talked about marketing. I'm thinking now in terms of marketing this as a career. What would you say to a young person with an interest in science but casting around what shall I focus on? How would you sell it to them as sort of the great, this is where you need to work, this is the future? Going back to the title of our session.
Actually, our own data scientist, when he recently posted a job ad for a role at Mendeley in data science, I think he referenced a study which said that data science was the sexiest job of the 21st century. Now, I'm not sure that that's true, but it's certainly fun if you have an inclination to play with numbers. So, I mean, for myself, my PhD was in social science, but I always enjoyed playing around with numbers. And with statistics. So, I mean, I don't think that you can make everyone a data scientist, but statistical and number literacy and fostering that early on might be a good approach.
But perhaps also some of those stories that you were telling at the beginning, and Christina, and you have all been illustrating what you can do with this stuff, what's being done. So if you want to change the world, this might be a way to do it. Just to comment more here on Twitter, does this idea that the EU should create a single market for data really make sense? Data is rather fluid and difficult to contain. So there, that point, yes, which actually goes to the broader, I think you talked about the international frameworks rather than just a focus on the European level. Let's go out. I want to look to the future a bit in a minute, and where earlier, Christina, you talked about the commitment to R&D funding. There's also another issue in funding related, which is the e-infrastructure for all of this. How do you pay for it? And so on. So I'd like to do a little bit of looking ahead to where we go from here in a minute. But let's go out into the audience first and take some more comments and questions. Yes, please, sir. Thank you.
Simon Hampton. Given the PISA results from the OECD suggested that East Asia was way ahead of Europe, is big data, given what you just said about needing to have an affinity with numbers, is big data the paradigm change that will really make this the Asian century and really the end of Europe's supremacy, along with maybe America?
Okay, so when we look at those top 20 companies around the world, we might go down to none, and they will all be Asian, would be your suggestion. Yes, please, and then I'll come to you.
So my name is Laura Ventveer. I work in genomics in healthcare, and I think besides that there is a big future, I think there's actually an actual need in particular for cancer research. And so maybe good to know that there are over 150 organizations that came together, and actually from 21 countries, including United States, Europe, Asia, Australia, that started the Global Alliance for Genomics in Health. And that also includes actually the big companies that do data storage and data analytics. Because in cancer today, the details of data you can derive from patients are so detailed that you cannot have any comparison with a patient that is locally or maybe in the same country. So only if we start to combine the data internationally, you understand whether a patient with a mutation in a particular gene should be treated in a particular way. So I think, but that particular global alliance, of course, has many hurdles from the legal and regulatory aspects. So some initiatives have started to actually start to see if we can combine data and what are the hurdles. And I think many European organizations, including the EU, I think would be very good if they contribute to this alliance to bring us forward for actually better patient care.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Please, sir.
Jan van den Biezen from Philips. There's undeniably a lot of value in data, but I want to come back to your issue of open access. First, we need to distinguish between data and publications.
Yeah.
Publications, that I think now has become a non-issue. There's the golden route, the green route, and it will be prescribed in Horizon 2020. For data, it's slightly different. And as Business Europe, we have advocated a case-by-case approach, so that in the consortium, it should be possible to decide whether to make data openly available or not. Because there are cases where it's beneficial. There could also be cases, for example, if it is about all the lab data that you acquire in a project on key enabling technologies, that is not something that you necessarily want to share with all your competitors. So if business is to invest in R&D, the legitimate interest of business should be taken into account. Now, therefore, it's very good that in Horizon 2020 there is now a pilot phase where this can be explored. There is an opt-out clause, and let's make good use of that pilot period to find out how to work out the technicalities, the legalities.
Will the big clue come from how many people opt in and opt out? Will that be the biggest indicator of where the problem is?
That is what some people fear, that there will not be enough opt-ins.
To learn from it, yeah.
But let's make good use of it.
Okay.
I mean, the Commission had a good approach to explore open access to publications in FP7.
Yeah.
Let's continue that good and careful approach in Horizon 2020.
And as you say, use this pilot project in order to do that. There was one right in the middle. Yeah, just coming back to you, sir. Please, if you don't mind me reaching across you. Thank you very much.
My name is Patrick Hajek, and I'm an entrepreneur and company founder from Ireland. Christina used the phrase privacy requires innovation. I want to turn that on its head and say innovation requires privacy. If we are really going to build this world-class innovation environment in Europe, is it not the case that we want world-class legislative framework regarding privacy? Can I suggest that instead of the EU needing a more open legislative framework, it needs a more restrictive one? And it needs a more restrictive framework. It needs one in which we undo some of the direction that we've taken with actions like the Data Retention Directive. And we build maybe an equivalent for big data of what we have done with renewable energy, where we have higher ideals and we try to build a framework which is more ambitious and perhaps closer to the ideals of European citizens.
Thank you very much indeed. Okay, there's quite a few there, so let's come back on those points. Who would like to, perhaps Christina, pick up on that last point first? You have your own mic in front of you. Yeah, and then we'll come back on the others.
Can we just have this room for the rest of the day? Because I think we have a lot to talk about. Some fantastic questions, and that last one is particularly dear to my heart. You asked whether innovation requires privacy and whether Europe doesn't need a world-class data protection regulatory framework. And I would wholeheartedly subscribe to both of those notions. I'm not sure this is what you are saying, but oftentimes I hear in conversations like this one that we've got to choose. That we've got to choose between privacy and the economic, social, health benefits that we can gain by using data. And as I said, I'm not quite sure whether you're saying that or not, but I reject that. I think that's a false choice. And I think that kind of either or zero-sum thinking is, together with education, a really critical risk, a really critical hurdle that we have to overcome. In my own work, which is very concrete, I've seen that we can have both. We can have both when we think about privacy, when we think about individuals, as we're designing applications and data uses. This is the privacy by design approach that I referenced earlier. And I think that a world-class data protection regime is going to acknowledge that, is going to enable both. And I'd like to pick up on the question about Asia as well. I was in Asia last month talking to regulators there about their approach, and they are very focused on this. They are very focused on creating regulatory regimes that enable both. So I myself don't think that this is going to be the thing that leads to the rise of Asia over everybody else. What I do think is that countries, regions that embrace this, that really take advantage of this, are going to be the leaders of the next century.
Okay. Maryline, could you just pick up on this point, because you were talking about combining data sets from different disciplines and so on, and the great creativity. The other point made there about combining them internationally is absolutely essential, but that there are a few problems, obviously legal, regulatory, and therefore speaker there suggesting we really need to focus on this if we're going to get the maximum benefit.
Well, we don't try to limit the data at European level, certainly not, because science is everywhere, and we are working with this organization that have member states all over the planet. So in the case of volcanoes on earthquake, I mean, they happen in Japan, they happen in Haiti, they happen everywhere. So we need to have all the data collected at any location. So it's more the infrastructure that we are building that is essentially based on European assets. But the data on the users are coming from all over the planet. And yes, we are working with the MBL, and we are working on this genomics, and yes, there is some privacy aspect that we have to look at, and where the data can stay, and all these kind of things. And we are working on saying how much could be solved. And legislation is certainly something that is sometimes missing.
Thank you. Victor, given the barriers that you talked about at the beginning, you compared the European, how difficult it is to get funding on either side of the Atlantic, but now we bring in the Asia equation. You brought in the legislative uncertainty, the talent issue. Do you think it's going to be Asia's century? And if it doesn't have to be, what does Europe need to do to make sure it's Europe's century, not Asia's century?
So despite looking Asian, I'm not an Asia expert, so I don't think I can really illuminate that question much, except maybe saying that from my understanding that the maths education in Asia is quite rote. Yeah. Whereas I think what's needed for successful data scientists or scientists in general is pattern recognition and creativity. and looking at an amorphous mass of data and seeing certain trends emerge that aren't obvious. So that's not necessarily a math skill as much as connecting the dots skill. But maybe coming back to the other question about privacy, I can share an anecdote from early on when we started Mendeley back in 2009. We had just launched Mendeley, and at that stage, our data gathering was completely opt-in. So we had Mendeley, the desktop software, and we said for anyone who wants to have their data synchronized to the Mendeley cloud, which then also means that it's available in an aggregate fashion to the community, has to put it into a specific folder called My Mendeley Online Library or something like that. And almost nobody did it. Also, we got a lot of emails complaining that why didn't this happen automatically? Why did people have to cumbersome, in a very cumbersome fashion, select documents and pull them into a folder? Why wasn't everything synchronized automatically? And we were fretting, being German, thinking, oh, are we going to violate people's privacy if we switch this on by default? Will people feel that we are trying to hoover up all of the information and make it accessible to the community? But we then thought, well, we can switch it on, and if people really complain, then we'll switch it off again.
And did they?
They didn't. So in the first, I would say, 3 or 4 months of Mendeley's existence, maybe 10,000 documents were being uploaded in total. And then once we switched it on, the first day had 10,000 documents. And almost, I think pretty much nobody opted out. And from that point on, we had this incredible exponential growth where now, as I said, we have 500 million documents added to the platform in total. So I think we shouldn't be overcautious about what people expect in terms of privacy. I mean, certainly it is a valid concern, but we should take, I think, calculated risks and be prepared to rather, apologize and roll back. Maybe some areas should be exempt from this thinking, obviously with medical information, but in general, taking risks, I think, is to be welcome.
Okay. Did you want to come in there? No. I just wanted to come back on this question of R&D, because you mentioned it right at the beginning, and there's a question here from Twitter saying, it seems that big data and cloud just need scientists. What about science and R&D policy people? So the R&D policy being as important as those who then carry out the actual research. You talked about that commitment. How do we know? How do we decide? I mean, do you see gaps now that need public funding, public R&D funding, and a match of public and private funding? Where would you focus the R&D now? And how are we going to be able to predict where to go in future? And linked to that, because we're talking about money and we don't have much time left, infrastructure. You need a huge infrastructure to store all of this and to do it. Who's going to pay for that? A word on the infrastructure first, Maryline, perhaps if you would, and then on the R&D commitment, and then we'll try and draw some conclusions, please.
Yes, the infrastructure, of course, is needed, and we need not only CPUs on storage, we need network, we need tools, we need people coming there, bringing the data, bringing their expertise, and this is what we're trying to build with this Helix Nebula things, taking all what has been paid by the Commission so far, like the GEO network is part of it, the EGI grid is part of it, on all these things, and we add the commercials to be sure that we can go up very fast and be able to serve our needs. And this is, I mean, we've been pushing the limits very, very far, and we've expected that this cloud, if it's able to serve science, it will be able to serve everybody. I mean, it can be afterwards used for e-health, and it can be used for government, and it can be used by any individual that needs this kind of infrastructure.
But if it's got so much commercial potential, why should public money be used to pay for the infrastructures? Why should public money be used for the R&D? If it really is the big future, can't it be driven solely by private investment, Christina?
Well, I think that there are a great many market-driven investments right now. But research by its nature is not always about what is the now, it's about what's the future. And so those things that aren't going to pay off in the near term, but that are going to create basic understanding and basic knowledge for the future to build on, those things are not going to emerge out of the market. You asked earlier, where should the money be focused? And that's a big, complicated set of questions that would be the subject of another hour's debate. But a guiding principle and that is a corrective to a critical error is excellence. Mm. There's a tendency sometimes to want to direct funding in a way that's going to either create or bolster European champions. The focus should really be on participants who are going to provide excellence, on participants who are going to provide the best possible foundation in terms of infrastructure for the next generation of European innovators.
And that sort of answers, you must be psychic. Another question that's come in on Twitter about how can business be supported. You're arguing very clearly there the way it should and should not be, what you don't do. Victor, how important for you is, but you mentioned money and funding earlier, but you were talking about getting venture capital when you set up. In terms of public funding for R&D in this area, how important is that going to be? How are we going to identify what to focus it on if it is important to make sure we get maximum bang for bucks?
It was important for Mendeley as well. So we have had several EU-funded grants where we've worked with several European universities in developing, for example, data mining algorithms, recommendation algorithms. One current grant that's under FP7 is together with another German startup, MindMeister, which does online mind mapping, University of Graz and University of Constance. And that's about, in fact, creating a data marketplace for research data. And also data that is both provided by users, social as well as mined from the content. And those grants have been extremely helpful in providing us with access to talent, access to research. But they do come with quite a bit of overhead. So my co-founder, Jan, was the one who had to deal with it. He wasn't really the happiest person.
You mean the big piles of paper?
Yes, he spent several months just dealing exclusively with that. Some of the grants, probably in retrospect, we would not have done if we had known in advance the amount of overhead involved, including secondments, having to send our staff away to the partner universities for a while, where that basically disrupts your development schedule. And you know, the key word for software development companies is agile. You have to be able to respond to market needs. And so having these 2, 3, 5-year plans with half-year or 1-year secondments where you send your staff away just impose a very rigid structure that doesn't really gel with the needs of smaller startup companies.
So you would welcome the simplification in Horizon 2020, but there are other issues which also need to be addressed, very practical issues, to make the best use of the funding. Okay, we are nearly out of time, and I don't want to keep you from the closing ceremony of the convention, but I just want to try and draw some conclusions. So for each of you, and I'll start with you first, Maryline, of all the issues we've discussed and all the key areas of concern we need to address and so on, if you had to identify one priority, and it could be something the private sector should do, be something government should do, something the EU should do, to make sure the big data has the big future that we've been talking about, but that we also take account of the concerns, and we've heard them again expressed in this room in the last hour and a quarter. What for you is the key next step, the key priority? Where do we go from here?
Well, we would build on the success of Elix Nebula with this public-private partnership, and to ensure sustainability and to ensure fast growth, and to federate all the resources needed in terms of assets, in terms of tools, in terms of knowledge, in terms of data, to cover the full scientific workflow. So this means extend the principle of the marketplace to what we would call an e-infrastructure commons. And that was presented 2 weeks ago in Cloudscape, and I presented it in Japan 10 days ago, which is bringing not only cloud, but also high-performance computing, volunteer computing, network tools. But this would mean changing the way science is being paid today. So the funding mechanism of science would have to change. But this would allow every scientist to work on a platform, not bother about infrastructure, have the infrastructure available for doing what they want, and have the data, the tools, and everything to make their research.
Thank you very much. Victor?
I'm biased here, but for me the most exciting area is basically startups and what two guys in a garage can do with the resources today. I mean, when we started, we were also, three German PhD students with no money in our pockets. And today it's a company of 80 people in London with, 300 applications built again by small teams of people on top of our platform. And we did need quite a bit of venture capital to get there. But I think with the technologies available today, all you need are some good ideas and the willingness to take a risk, and then you can come up with really world-changing ideas out of literally nothing. But having said that, at the risk of repeating myself, for me really the biggest threat is government intrusion and the loss of faith that people have in, big data technologies in general, and decreased willingness to engage with these tools.
Okay, thank you very much. Christina, last word.
I'd go back to the themes of trust and innovation that I've been emphasizing throughout our talk today. I think it's critical that we, whatever our roles are, whether we're in the companies that are creating and using these technologies, or in governments, or as individuals, that we take the actions we need to take to create a foundation of trust for the digital economy to thrive. And that we, at the same time, embrace innovation, that we reject an either-or choice and remain open to the benefits and remain open to the rest of the world.
And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, will you join me in thanking our panel very much indeed? Thank you. Thank you to all of you. Thank you for your questions. Apologies for the voice, and I'll leave you to make